program. He came up to do an interview with me. His name's Clay Presley. He's a cousin of Elvis. He is. And he lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he came up to do an interview with me, and I couldn't believe that he actually flew all that way just to do an interview, so I took him up flying in my Waco, and he really liked it, and within a couple of weeks he's asking me, how do you learn how to fly? How do you, what do you do? And anyways, he's gotten his private pilot license. Since then, we went and got seaplane ratings together last fall, so, we made it legal. And this summer, we're actually going to be going up to Alaska and taking a bush flying course. But that day was a little over 4 years ago for me, January 15th of 2009. And, it was just a normal leg for us. In fact, it was the last leg of our 4-day trip. And while I know you want to think that it's all about you in the back of the airplane, the fact is we were late, and we were trying to get back to Charlotte as rapidly as possible so that Sully could catch his last flight home to San Francisco, which is where he lives. As we taxied out to the runway that day, it was just bitterly cold. It was, for the cold front had moved through, pushed a lot of snow and clouds off to the east. And it was just, I just remember how that wind just kind of bit through you when I did my walk around there in LaGuardia. But for me, this was kind of a new experience because I had just gotten out of training. This was actually my very first trip on the Airbus, as a line trip. I'd been flying the 737 in the Philadelphia base for the previous 8 years. And I went through, for an airline pilot, it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to transition to a new airplane. I'd just gotten out of that and completed that process literally the week before. And so here I am on my first line trip on the Airbus. It was also my first trip with Sully. A lot of people think that you're joined at the hip and you fly together as a crew, for months or years on end, but in fact that's simply not the case. Anybody who's an airline pilot here knows in the crowd that every trip you show up, you might be flying with people you've never even met before. In Sully's case, I'd never even I met him, 3 days before this flight, and on the course of this trip, this was our 6th leg up until that point. As we were holding short at the end of the runway, Sully's taxiing the airplane, and as the captain always does, I'm setting all the controls for takeoff, making sure our weight and balance information is inputted, all the normal duties for a first officer on the airplane. I've actually been a captain at US Airways in the past, but at the time I also ran another business. I was a general contractor. I built houses. So as a first officer, I could essentially pick my schedule, work when I wanted to, which worked better for my business, rather than as a captain where I would have been very low in seniority and I wouldn't have been able to really run my business. So at the time I was working as a first officer. The air traffic controller clears us onto the runway for takeoff, and Sully taxis the airplane out, lines it up with the center line, and then he sets the parking brake, and he says, "Your aircraft," and I say, "My aircraft," which is how we transfer control of the aircraft on the runway to make sure that somebody is always in positive control of the airplane. We're clear for takeoff, and I reach over and I push the throttles up 3 clicks into the takeoff and go around setting. An Airbus is a fly-by-wire airplane, which means that absolutely nothing in this cockpit is attached to anything. So even though you've got these big thrust levers that you push forward, they operate these little micro switches underneath the panel. So you might as well just had a push button or a toggle switch or something to set the power to a certain setting. But we still have those kind of controls because that's what a pilot is used to operating. We start to accelerate down the runway. Sully calls out our standard callouts of 80, V1, rotate. I pull back on the side stick, which you can see just a little bit right over whatever that white thing is. You can see it just to the left there. That's actually what you control the airplane with. And we're in the air. He says positive rate, and I call gear up. We start to accelerate out to the north, and climb out and start to raise our flaps. At about 3,000 feet in the air, just as I'm pitching over to accelerate, I see something kind of slightly to the right, but still right ahead of the airplane. And I look out and I focus on it, and it's a line of birds. And they're too close to possibly maneuver around. And then I hear Sully say birds. And that fast we're on top of them. You can hear their bodies as they're impacting off the fuselage, off the wings and the engines. It sounds as if you were flying through hail. And I remember thinking that, we got to figure out what's wrong. We got to assess, what kind of capability we have left. And then after about just a second or two, both engines completely lose thrust. They make kind of a high whining sound at climb power, and they were just reduced to nothing. And I remember the shock of it. It felt like when you have a really bad cold and your head is suddenly feels like it's swelled to twice its size. So I'm still hand flying the airplane, and I'm trying to push the stick forward to keep the airplane flying because the airspeed is just bleeding off at this because we've got the nose up in the air. We're at minimum airspeed. We just wiped all the power off the airplane. So I'm pushing the stick forward to try to keep the airplane flying. And Sully decides to take over control of the airplane at this point, which is his prerogative. He's the captain. And he says, "My aircraft." And I said, "Hey, your aircraft." But that's actually a signal for us because we have, and we're highly trained in this, so we just know this from rote memory. What that meant was more than he was flying the airplane. I mean, we had switched roles. He was going to fly the airplane and talk on the radio. I was going to pull out what we call a quick reference handbook. That's what they call it. It's 177 pages. You could use it for protection. It's so heavy. And but I'm supposed to be the one who's going to handle the emergency and try to run the checklist and try to restart the engines in this case. So I immediately reach for my quick reference handbook and find the proper checklist. About 4 months after this incident, we actually had to go down to the National Transportation Safety Board and listen to our cockpit voice recorder over and over and over again because they weren't able to understand what certain words were and they didn't understand how we communicated. And in that, it really seemed to happen almost seamlessly. Within 20-some seconds, I had found my quick reference handbook, 20 seconds of hitting the birds, found the thing, found the right page, and was starting to read the checklist, which some Airbus engineers, because it's an Airbus, were amazed that I could ever do that fast, because in their normal, the normal allotment for somebody to just sit there and recover and figure out what's going on and decide what their next step is about 30-35 seconds with the people who study these things. But I told them I had a reason to be motivated. Sully's talking to our air traffic controller about going back to LaGuardia, and I remember I couldn't see it because it was behind us on the left on his side of the airplane. Our only options were to go back to LaGuardia, to land in the Hudson River, which is right ahead of us, or Teterboro Airport, which is off to our right. And I couldn't make any judgment on LaGuardia, but Teterboro, I remember watching it for a short while, and I could see it start to rise in our windshield, which of course any pilot knows means that you simply can't reach it. So we had no choice, obviously, but to continue ahead down the Hudson River. And I remember as I'm kind of going through my checklist, trying to restart the engines, thinking to myself that, this can't be happening to me. That this must be a dream, and that I'm gonna wake up and that we're gonna be parking at the gate. Shortly, about 1,000 feet in the air, we know we're not going to be able to get these engines to restart in time. They were completely actually destroyed by the heat, but we didn't know it at that point. The right engine actually had lost the entire first compressor spool These engines actually have about 17 what they call spools, which are, they'd be like a propeller blade, right? Except that it's got, 77 little blades that go around on the spool. And there's 17 stages of that. The first one had been completely destroyed, and all that metal went back through the rest of the engine, just destroying it. The left engine was a little better, but the birds somehow managed to knock the fuel nozzles out of most of the burner cans, and the fuel was going around the engine and igniting in the slipstream, which is why there was fire shooting out 50 feet behind the left engine. Now, at least up in the cockpit, we knew what the situation was. It wasn't good, but we knew what it was. We could see the river, we knew what happened. There wasn't that sense of confusion that I'm sure, really gripped the people in the back of the airplane. The passengers actually, they actually handled the situation pretty well. But still, at this point, they're still thinking they can see that the flames shooting out of the left-hand side of the airplane, but they're figuring we're probably going to be returning to land on the engine on the right. As we're descending down to the river, though, what I remember most was all the noise in the cockpit. We have all kinds of warning alerts, and a number of them are going off at the same time, some of them erroneously. We're getting these automated voices that are saying too low gear, too low flap. We flew too close to a helicopter that came up the Hudson River, so we're getting this traffic call out from the warning systems. For those of you who are pilots, our airline pilots, our ground proximity warning system was even chiming in with a whoop whoop pull up call out for a while. And then we have an alert bell which announces us new failures, and this thing's just going off continuously as all these cascading failures are overwhelming this monitoring system. Since now we've lost both engines, we've lost the generators, we're losing hydraulic pumps. Through all this noise, Sully had the presence of mind to reach back and grab the public address telephone, which sits between the two seats that's on the back of the console, and he picks us up, and it looks just like an old-style telephone. And you press the button and you talk, and it goes over the PA in the back. And he says, "This is the captain. Brace for impact." And this is actually a sign to the flight attendants so that they can start into their emergency preparedness training. And they start chanting, "Brace, brace, heads down, stay down," over and over and over again to get the passengers into the right position for a crash landing. Now with this, the passengers know they're not going back to land at an airport. So, they handled it a number of ways. Some of them wrote notes, to leave in their shirt pockets. A very large number of them texted their loved ones on the phones that are supposed to be shut down when you leave the gate. One passenger that I know quite well, in fact, if you saw any of the TV shows about him, you know him too. His name's Barry. And he had actually had 2 days of bad luck. The previous day, his wife had been diagnosed with breast cancer. So being a spiritual man, he made a pact with God. And so, he said, "God, if you have to take somebody, please take me." So here it is, less than 24 hours later, and he's plummeting to the earth in this engineless aircraft, and he doesn't know what the next few seconds of his life are going to hold. And Barry told me, he says, all I could think about was, "God, I know we made this pact. But did it really have to be so soon?" Back up in the cockpit, we know we're going to have to ditch the aircraft. So I started calling out airspeeds and altitudes to Sully off of our radar altimeter. Now, one of the very fortunate things about this moment, and I tell people, we had 1 moment of bad luck and 1,000 moments of good luck that made it possible. But right at that moment, the river was actually clear. Any of you have ever seen the Hudson River, it's just a very heavily congested artery for boats, barges, things going up and down. But at that moment, right ahead of us, there was nothing in our way. Right before we touched down, well, actually, when I told you we went down to listen to National Transportation Safety Board cockpit voice recorder tape about 4 months later. And when we did that, we both heard something that we didn't even, neither of us remembered at all from the day. You know, right before we touched down on the river, you know, Sully says, got any other ideas? And I said, actually, no. I don't know why I can't talk when I get close to the podium or the wedding.
Cone of silence.
But we hit hard on the tail. But then it seemed like the river just cascaded over the airplane. It seemed like it was driving its nose right for the bottom of the river. But then it just popped up, and it was bobbing in the waves, the way you see in that picture. And I remember I turned to Sully and I said, well, that wasn't so bad. But we lost all electrical power, so he had to get up and actually command the evacuation because the flight attendants aren't going to do anything until they hear him say, evacuate, evacuate. So he got up and left the airplane. I stayed behind, or the cockpit. I stayed behind with my quick reference handbook because we have a emergency evacuation checklist. It's the very front page of the handbook. And I'm looking at this, and the first item is parking brake set. Second one is engines 1 and 2 off. Well, one of them is off the airplane, at the bottom of the river at this point. The other one is shut down. So I went through the rest of this, and none of it was really applicable. So about 45 seconds go by, I'm estimating, and I go back, and I'm in that little hallway between the cockpit and the cabin. Already the first 10 rows or so of the airplane are empty of passengers. They're going out into the rafts on either side of the boarding door and the galley door, and people are going out onto the wings. They're pretty enthusiastic about getting off that airplane. But I'm immediately faced with this guy running up towards me. It's like maybe 25 years old. And he's wearing nothing but boxer shorts and a pair of sweat socks. I mean, it's January, 20 degrees out. And, I know people don't dress up as much as they used to on the airlines, but I'm pretty confident he didn't get on the airplane that way. I found out later it was his idea that he was going to swim to shore. So he'd taken all his clothes off back there in the cabin somehow. Right, we're all counting ourselves lucky that he left the boxer shorts on. But he wouldn't have got 10 feet in that water. The river actually started to freeze over just 2 days after this incident, so it was very cold. But he stops in front of me, and he's already realizing he's probably shivering. He says, what do I do? And I said, go get in the raft. And I told the next 3 people to sit on that guy to keep him warm. After the passengers left the airplane, Sully and I both went back to about the middle of the airplane where the over-wing exits are and started getting life vests and seat cushions and passing them out to the people in the wings. Because you have to pay pretty close attention to know that life vests actually hang below the seats in little pouches. So nobody thought to do that and take it with them. So we were passing out the seat cushions and life vests to the people over the wings, and there the water was up to our knees. The airplane was settling in. It was sinking lower as we were back there. But I remember thinking I was never more than maybe 20 feet or so from one of those emergency exit hatches over, so I could have probably have gotten out if the airplane suddenly started to sink. So I wasn't at all concerned for my own safety. And after about some period of time, and I don't know how long we were back there, but we managed to clear out all the life vests and the seat cushions in the area. And Sully says, let's get out of here. So we went back forward, and we actually left through the door that you normally board the airplane through. And I remember, this odd feeling, because in the cabin, it was just, us, and we didn't really know what was going on outside the airplane at all. And as soon as you walked out that door and got into the raft, it was just pandemonium was going on out on the river. The airplane was already surrounded by boats, by ferries, by fireboats. There was a helicopter overhead that was dropping a police frogman into the water to help the passengers that were slipping off the wings. I have no idea how he got there so quickly or so rapidly. And this helicopter was kicking up spray, which was just freezing everybody in our boat. I managed to cut the tether that tied our raft to the, to the actual plane. We floated around the nose of the aircraft, and a big passenger ferry comes up right beside us, reverses his engines, comes to a stop right next to the raft. And we're sitting, of course, down on the water in this raft, and the deck of this thing is up 6-8 feet above the ground, or above the water. And I'm thinking, well, how are we going to get up there? Another obstacle. So a crewman comes out and he throws a boarding net over the side. And I remember looking at the boarding net thinking, what is this, D-Day? We're supposed to climb up this? I mean, my hands are frozen from being in that water in the airplane. We started walking on the seats and the armrests when we were in there. We still had to reach underneath in that ice water with our hands to get those life rafts. And I can't grip anything. I can't even move my fingers anymore. They throw a rope over the side, and I remember holding it in my elbow, kind of leaning up against the side of the against the side of the boat in misery to hold this raft next to the boat while the passengers were going up this boarding net. And it was almost as if I'd fallen asleep or I lost track of time, because it seemed like almost instantly I heard Sully behind me say, Jeff, we better get out of here while we still can. And I remember looking around and seeing that, I was surprised to see that the 30 or so passengers that were in our raft were gone. They were already up on the boat. So we climbed up the ladder into the boat, and I remember walking into the heated cabin area, and there was one of our passengers there. And he was standing there, and he had one of those flip phones. He just flipped it shut because he called somebody. And he looks at it, and he looks at me, and he offers it to me. And I thought, well, maybe I should call somebody. My phone's in the plane. So I thought, well, I'll call my wife. Tell her I'm not going to be home tonight. So I dial the number, with my knuckle. It takes me about 3 tries to get it right, because my hands are just, I can't even move them. And I got the phone up to my ear, standing in front of the windows, plane still floating by, passengers are still on the wings at this point. And she answers, and I said, hi. She says, hi. I said, I don't think I'm going to be home tonight. And she says, why? And I don't know, like the last 20 minutes of my life just sort of came spurting out of me. And I said, well, we took off from LaGuardia, we hit birds, we flamed out both engines, we had to ditch the airplane in the Hudson River. We think we got everybody out okay. I got to go. And I hung up. So I give the phone to Sully, and he tries calling home, but his wife, they have caller ID. And she's talking to a friend of hers on the phone, so when it beeps, she looks at it and she says, oh, it's just Sully. He'll call back later if it's important. So he tries to call our dispatcher, because we have dispatchers in the airline business, just like, trucking companies do, to tell them where we left the airplane. And to his credit, he actually answers the phone and he says, I don't have time to talk to you right now. We have an airplane down in the Hudson. Now, I remember sitting on that boat and, with all the last 20 minutes or whatever it is of my life, all the shock and everything, and the boat's rolling pretty good, and I'm beginning to feel really sick. But fortunately, we actually were only a few hundred yards from the ferry dock. So, the boat was there in no time, and I remember the boat kind of touching at the ferry dock, and having this sense of great relief. The flight only took 5 minutes. 2 minutes until we took off and hit the geese, 3.5 minutes until we landed in the Hudson River. And it has taken me 5 times that long just to tell you about it. Bill? We have to do this because their system doesn't work so well with my presentation. That's the wrong one.
Cactus 1549, 700, landing 5,000. Cactus 1549, departure to contact, I maintain 15,000. 5000, Cactus 1549.
Cactus 15.9, turn left lane 270.
This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds through lost thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
Tower, stop your departure. He's got emergency returning. It's 1529. He bird strike. He lost all engine. He lost the thrust in the engines. He's returning immediately.
Cactus 1529. Which engines?
He lost thrust in both engines, he said.
Got it.
Cactus 1529. We can get it for you. Do you want to try to land runway 13?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
All right, Cactus 15.9. It's going to be less traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
Okay, what do you need to land? Do you want to try to go to Teterboro?
Yes.
Teterboro, Empire. Actually, LaGuardia departure guy, emergency inbound.
Hey, go ahead.
Cactus 1529 over the George Washington Bridge. Wants to go to the airport right now.
Wants to go to our airport. Check. Does he need assistance?
Yes, it was a bird strike. Can I get him in for runway 1?
Runway 1, that's good.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280. You can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus? Cactus 15.9, radar contact is lost. You also got Newark Airport up at 2 o'clock in about 7 miles. Eagle Flight 4718, turn left lane 210.
210, 4718. I think he said he was going in the Hudson.
Cactus 1529, Houston.
Man.
We weren't at the ferry dock long before the politicians arrived. Mayor Bloomberg and Governor Patterson came down to hold a press conference on site about something that Sully and I thought we were the only ones that really knew anything about. And this is where Governor Patterson coined the phrase, the miracle in the Hudson, which is what the event's been known as ever since. And of course, you know, for a pilot, this didn't end the situation at all. Obviously, you know, you got a long investigation, and we were actually in New York for another several days afterwards, being interviewed. They call it an interview. I would call it something else. By the National Transportation Safety Board in their conduct of, in the conduct of their investigation. Anyways, I eventually made it home to Wisconsin, and of course, you could imagine, I had TV trucks parked out in front of the house. You couldn't even go outside to go get the mail. And, you know, I wasn't answering the phone because the phone was ringing constantly. We just let the answering machine fill up and then just, you know, shut off the phone. And reporters were coming to the door all the time, so I couldn't answer the door. But my wife insisted on answering whenever anybody came. And after about a week, a guy named Dave Wyman, who publishes a magazine called the Midwest Flyer, comes to the door. I didn't know him at the time. And he gives my wife a note, which she comes and takes to me, and it says, Tom Poberesny would like you to call him, and with a phone number. Because, of course, Tom was always on the lookout for the next big attraction for AirVenture. So I called him, and he asked if Sully and I would come to AirVenture, and so I called up Sully, and we did that, and then that was when Sully and I became the co-chairman of the Young Eagles program, which we still are to this day. And actually about a little over a year ago, I actually started working there because I'm still on a leave of absence from US Airways. I went back to work for about an hour or a year and a half afterwards, and then they were offering leaves. I was doing some other things. And so now that's brought me to EAA as a regular employee, at least, you know, for the next 2 years until I have to go back to US Airways. So that's my story. That's the story of the miracle in the Hudson. And also it kind of ends our presentation here today. What we would like to do is to have our drawing for our grand package for our AirVenture.
I never put my ticket in.
Is this it?
There's more tickets.
Oh, the box arrived. I didn't even know we had a box.
There's tickets up here.
There's tickets up here.
Where are the tickets at?
We just filled them out. We didn't know what to do.
Oh, you got to pass it out. Yeah. Okay, well, tell you what. while we're collecting up the remainder of those tickets, you pass them all this direction.
I think that's the one.
And what's it that direction?
That
Okay,
direction.
then I guess either direction.
Okay,
Either
either
direction
direction.
will work fine.
Okay, either direction.
This would have worked out better.